Every culture on Earth has tried to bring someone back from the dead. In mythology, at least, a handful of them came close. Close enough that the failure is the story. Because the myths that tried hardest to reverse death and failed are not really about death at all. They are about the specific, catastrophic mistake that sealed the door permanently, and the rules that exist to make sure nobody makes that mistake again. 5 traditions. 5 almost resurrections. 5 different reasons the answer was no. Orpheus and Eurydice, Greek mythology. Orpheus was the greatest musician who ever lived, the son of Apollo, whose playing could move rocks and still rivers, and make the trees lean toward him to listen. When his wife Eurydice died from a snake bite on their wedding day, he did the only thing he knew. He played his way into the underworld. It worked. Charon ferried him across the Styx. Cerberus lay down and listened. Hades himself wept openly, while Orpheus sang of his grief. Persephone leaned toward her husband and asked him to let the woman go. Hades agreed on one condition. Eurydice would follow Orpheus out, but he could not look back until they both stood in the light of the living world. They climbed. The passage was long and dark, and Orpheus could hear nothing behind him. No footsteps, no breathing, no sign that anyone was there. A few steps from the exit, he turned. Eurydice was right behind him, still in the dark. The moment his eyes found her, she was pulled back. The ancient sources record that she did not cry out. She simply said his name once and was gone. Orpheus tried to follow. The gates were sealed. He wandered Greece for years, playing mourning songs until the Maenads tore him apart. His head floated down the river, still singing, and washed up on the island of Lesbos, where it became an oracle. The rule Hades set was not a trap. It was the only condition death could accept. Trust without proof. The one thing grief makes impossible. Izanami and Izanagi Shinto sacred tradition, Japan. Izanami was the goddess who created the islands of Japan alongside her husband Izanagi. She died giving birth to the god of fire, and her soul descended to Yomi, the land of the dead, a dark and decaying underworld beneath the earth. Izanagi followed her. He found her in the darkness and begged her to come back. She told him she had already eaten the food of Yomi, and by that act was bound to it. She could try to negotiate her release from the gods of the underworld, but he had to wait, and above all, he had to promise not to look at her. He promised. He waited. And then he lit a comb from his hair as a torch and looked. Izanami's body was rotting, crawling with maggots, 8 gods of thunder clinging to her decomposing form. Izanagi fled in terror. Izanami, shamed and furious at what he had seen, sent demons and thunder gods to chase him. He escaped by rolling a massive boulder across the entrance to Yomi. They faced each other across it and dissolved their marriage. Izanami declared she would kill 1,000 people every day. Izanagi said he would bring 1,500 new lives into the world daily to balance her. That negotiation across a boulder is still running. The Shinto sacred texts record it as the explanation for why people are born and why people die. An argument between 2 former spouses that neither has won and neither will ever stop having. The rule here was not cruelty. It was the specific and irreversible contamination of the dead. Izanami had eaten Yomi's food. She was no longer what she had been. Izanagi saw that and ran from it. The boulder between the worlds has been there ever since. Baldur, Norse mythology. Baldur was the most beloved god in all of the 9 realms, radiant and gentle, and mourned by everything in existence when Loki's manipulation led to his death by mistletoe dart. His mother Frigg had extracted a sworn oath from every being in the cosmos that none of them would harm him. Every being except the mistletoe, which she had considered too young and small to bother with. When Baldur died, the gods sent a messenger named Hermod to the realm of Hell to negotiate his return. Hell agreed on one condition. Every being in all the 9 realms, living and dead, had to weep for Baldur, If every single thing grieved, she would release him. Everything wept. Every creature. Every rock. Every tree. Every river and every god and every giant. Everything except one. A giantess named Thok, seated in a cave, refused. She said Balder had never done anything for her, and she would shed no tears, living or dead. The ancient sources record her exact words as dry as a bone. Balder stayed in hell. Thok was Loki in disguise, and the ancient tradition preserves a pointed ambiguity about whether any of us, in Thok's position, would have cried either. The rule here was unanimous grief, not majority, not almost. Every voice. One refusal was enough. The myth frames this as a mathematical impossibility, because in any group large enough to contain everything, there will always be one Thok. Inanna's descent, Mesopotamian mythology. Inanna was the Sumerian goddess of love, war, and the evening star, and she descended into the underworld to visit her sister Ereshkigal, queen of the dead. At each of the 7 gates she passed through, she was stripped of a piece of her divine power, her crown, her armor, her robes, her jewelry, until she arrived before her sister naked and without protection. Ereshkigal killed her and hung her body on a hook. Inanna's servant alerted the gods. Only Enki responded. He created 2 small beings from the dirt under his fingernails and sent them down with the food and water of life to revive her. The plan worked. Inanna was restored. But the underworld does not release its dead without replacement. The laws of that realm were older than any god. Whatever left Ereshkigal's kingdom had to be replaced by something of equal value. Demons accompanied Inanna back to the surface to collect her substitute. She chose her husband Dumuzi, who had been sitting on her throne, dressed in fine clothing, while she hung on a hook in the underworld. Dumuzi was dragged down in her place. His sister Inanna eventually negotiated a compromise. Each would spend half the year below, while the other walked in the living world. The Mesopotamians used this to explain the seasons, the same way the Greeks explained them with Persephone. The rule here is the starkest on this list. The dead can return, but someone else has to go in their place. The underworld is not a prison. It is a ledger, and it always balances. Ouo and the eye that blinks, Akan tradition, West Africa. The Akan people of present-day Ghana tell a story about death that begins not with gods, but with a hungry man during a famine. Wandering in search of food, the man encountered an enormous giant lying in the countryside, his hair stretching from horizon to horizon. The giant introduced himself as Ewuo, which means death. He offered the man meat in exchange for service, and the man, starving, agreed. The meat was extraordinary. The man worked for Ewuo a long time, eating well, asking no questions. When he finally grew homesick and asked permission to leave, Ewuo agreed, but required him to send a replacement. The man returned to his village and brought his brother back to Ewuo. Then he grew hungry again and returned for more meat. Then again. Each visit, more people from his family had disappeared into Ewuo's service. Eventually, he searched the house and found the bones of his brother, his sister, and her maid. He ran home and told the village what Ewuo was. They came in force and burned Ewuo's enormous hair. In the hair, they found a reviving medicine and used it to bring back the dead. The man, feeling guilty, poured the last of the medicine onto Ewuo's single great eye. The eye flew open and began to blink. Every time Ewuo blinks, the Akan tradition says, a person dies. The medicine that brought the dead back became the mechanism of death itself. The act of resurrection created the engine of permanent mortality. And Ewuo, the tradition records, is still out there in the countryside, blinking. 5 cultures, 5 unsuccessful returns. The musician who could not trust his own ears. The husband who could not keep his eyes closed. The goddess whose resurrection required exactly one perfect condition that could never be met. The ancient balance sheet of the underworld that always collects its debt. and the medicine meant to end death made it permanent instead. Every tradition that built a myth around this question arrived at the same structural answer. Death can almost be beaten. The almost is the point. There is always a rule, a moment, a single blink standing between the almost and the impossible. The door opens one way. The myths exist to explain why anyone would ever believe otherwise. If you have enjoyed these tales from mythology, consider subscribing. If you have a favorite myth you would like us to cover, let us know in the comments.